Now, we would like to start JICA Ogata Institute and the Institute of Geoeconomics Joint Knowledge Forum, reconsidering the role of ODA from the perspective of mutual benefit. First, on behalf of co-host Institute of Geoeconomics, we will have Jimbo, Managing Director, International House of Japan, President of API. Jimbo-san, please. Good afternoon. I'm from the International House of Japan, and I am responsible for a program. My name is Jimbo. Thank you very much for coming, JICA Ogata Sadoko Research Institute, as well as the Institute of Geoeconomics International Forum, the Forum of Reconsidering the Role of ODA from the Perspective of Mutual Benefit. Thank you for attending. Both institutions, we are very, very grateful that we were able to co-host this forum. Furthermore, from foreign diplomacy, national security, economy, industry, and from the civil society, from diverse perspectives, we have people who are representative of these areas, which really represents the importance and the broadness of this theme. Globally, as you understand, international cooperation, such as international order, has been eroded and is becoming more complex and diversified. In other words, it's becoming multiplex. The economic national security tense, as well as the strategic of mutual dependency, as well as climate changes, as well as infections, food, energy, as well as debt issues, which are global issues, has become complex. As such, the ODA is the base of policy that supports orders, and I believe it requires rethinking. The Japanese government has set up the 2030 Corporation Charter, which is rule of law and open and fair society, and Japan's security as well as further prosperity is the purpose of the development, which is underscored. At the same time, the environment surrounding ODA has drastically changed. The OECD's 2035 preliminary measures, the ODA total amount has been reduced by 21.3% among these nations. So the bilateral ODA has fallen by 26%. Multinational ODA has reduced by 27%. On the other hand, for the other gap ODAs, it represents 13.3 billion yen. So the actors are becoming more diverse. The major donors are reviewing and the new actors are rising. The role of ODA has to strategically be rethought. Within that, what is sought for Japan, I believe, are two extreme directions, and to avoid that, one is that ODA we don't just put that as a philosophy. In other words, short-term transactions or just wanting short-term return, we do not evaluate the ODA. Japan's strength is, I believe, in the middle of all of that. To think of the counterpart as equal partner, respect that, and try to make them self-sufficient, and at the same time, make Japan's national security and safety most robust, as well as maintain international order. And I believe that is where Japanese ODA's value lies. I believe that mutual benefit, which is the theme of today's forum, this word itself, I believe, should be sought in that context. Mutual benefit is the benefit of the counterpart and yourself, and you do not mechanically add, but you think about the development and the stability of the counterpart will bring about the international order that is sought from Japan, and that will develop the peace and stability and prosperity of the world. How we plan this, I think, is going to be important. The development charter touches upon the humans' security through dialogue and cooperation, co-creation and co-development, as well as laws, transparency, as well as fairness to penetrate these rules, I think really steers that direction. When you think about that, what is sought for the role of ODA going forward, first off, is in this world which is divided, how we are able to ramp up the trust. Secondly, coming up with institutionalization as well as fostering people and be able to provide options as well as strategic self-sufficiency in our counterparts. And thirdly, for the private institutions, international organizations, civil societies, research, we kind of combine that. And through these public interests, we are able to create new values. The Japanese Development Charter touches upon the collaboration of various actors as well as money from the private sector. Based on that, what we expect for today's forum is that through ODA, what kind of new values we are able to create against this question from the foreign diplomacy, economy, industry, from civil society, from the various perspective, we want to be able to mobilize and see how ODA can convey the message both here at home and abroad. I hope that we will have a very fruitful discussion. In particular, the power at the ground and be able to connect the various actors. I believe that the role of JICA is going to be more important. I hope that for the donors as well as the recipient, I hope that we will be able to move forward from this past structure and be able to create a new values to the international society through our discussions today. For all of those who are participating and will be speaking, I would like to express my gratitude and would like to close my comments.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jimbo. Now we would like to invite the Director General of JICA Ogata Research Institute, Ms. Kamei Haruko. Director Kamei, the floor is yours. Thank you very much. I am the Director General Kamei from JICA Ogata Research Institute. So among the speech, the opening speech, we have all the intent, or almost all the intent of today's forum covered. As Dr. Jimbo mentioned, talked about the multilateralism and the added complexity in the world order, and we are considering counterparts as a fair and equal partner and how we can build trust among ourselves. And recently, when we are in Japanese context, we talk about the Japan national interest and Japan economic security and ODA for the social and economic growth of Japan. And most of the ODA discussion is centered around such economic growth or national interest. And as Dr. Jimbo mentioned, among the International Cooperation Charter, aims for all the international societies, the stability and prosperity that leads ultimately to the stability and the interest of Japan, and create a free and open international order based on the order of law or the rule of law. And that will contribute to the international stability and prosperity. I think this is something we share as a common understanding. So we will receive introduction and the discussions around Europe. I paid a visit in France, in UK last month and held dialogues with our counterparts. We hear the word mutual benefits quite often in Europe, and what it means have a broad range of interpretation and understanding, I believe. But we would like to use this as a keyword to consider Japanese ODA, the official development assistance, and its value and role. We have a lot of panelists with different backgrounds, so we are hopeful to have an active discussion on the role and value of ODA. We would like to first start with Harada Tetsuya, the Chief Representative for Europe and the head of JICA France office, principal or research fellow, to give us a comparison of the discussion in Europe and Japan. Mr. Harada, the floor is yours.
はい、フランス事務所の原田です。
This is Harada from France office, JICA France office. I hope you can see my screen. Yes, we do. Thank you very
はい、
much.
そうしましたら、本日よろし
So
くお願い
without
いたし
further
ます。
ado, I would
本
like to
日
jump
の、
into my
フォーラムのテーマに関
presentation.
してですね、
So based on
ヨーロッパで
the
どういった議
theme of
論
this
があるかとい
forum,
う点に
I
つい
would
て
like
ご
to
紹介し
share
たい
the
と思います。
discussions held in Europe around ODA.
はい、まず、ヨーロッパの ODA ですけ
First,
れども、縮
about
小
ODA
傾
in
向に
Europe,
あ
there
り
is a
ます。
declining trend in European
左側に、
ODA.
主要国の
On
で
the
すね、
left-hand
予算の
side,
状
you
況に
can
ついて書いております
see
けれ
the
ども、
situation of the main
通常
countries
的
in
に
Europe and
イ
their
ギリスにつ
budget.
いて申し上げますと、
And for
2020
UK,
年、21年
UK
以降です
announced a
ね、こ
reduction
の ODA
of
をで
its
すね、
ODM,
GNI、
ODA
まあ、そ
from
の国の経済
2021.
規模を表す指標ですけれども、その
The-
0.7% というものを維持していた
So
ものを
they
です
are
ね、
reducing
0.3% ま
from
で下げるということが
0.7% to
表明されております。
0.5% of
ドイ
GNI,
ツ、フランスなどと
GNI
の連
being
携
the
で、
gross
まあ、一部ス
national
ペインのような拡大
uh,
路線もを維持してい
input.
るところもありますが、
They
全体と
decided
し
to
ては
further
縮小
reduce
傾向
by
にあると。
0.3% by
右のグラフで
2027.
すけれど
In
も、小路線
Germany,
で
they
です
have
ね、
also
2025
announced
年
to
のです
reduce by
ね、各
14%.
国
On the
の
right-hand
ODA 指
side,
数というもの
you
が出
can
ますの
find the
で、こ
ODA
こでご紹介し
volume,
ま
the
すけ
track
れど
record of
も、
ODA
こ
volume
の
up
グ
to
ラフでありますよう
2025.
に、ま
As
ず
you
ア
can
メ
see
リ
in
カ
this
ですね、
graph, US,
去
USA,
年初めにですね、
starting
USAID
from
の解
last
体というこ
year,
ともございましたけれども、
they
や
have
はり24年に比
resolved
べて、半分以
USAID
下のリスク、リスク
and
となっていると。その結
they
果、
air
小さですけれど
spending
も、
is
ドイツ
halved
が、
compared to
昨年
2024.
は、一番大き
And
な、
Germany
ドナーとなったという結果になります。
became the
さらに、
largest
まあ、その
donor
後、
in
イギリス、
2025. And
日
then
本、
after
フ
that,
ランスがです
UK,
ね、
Japan,
上位という
France
ことであると。
follows.
で、こういった中でですね、
So
改め
amid this
てヨーロッパでの
situation,
その ODA のあるべき姿といったと
there
こ
is a
ろがです
renewed
ね、
debate on the
議論
role
が
of
活性化して
ODA
い
in
る状況で
Europe.
す。
So
真
the
ん中にありま
discussion's
すけ
been
れども、
rekindled.
ま
And
あ
as you
短
can
期
see in
的
the
にはですね、
middle,
この3つの分野で、ODA を
there's a
どこ
debate
に
among three
重
competing
視していくかとい
objectives
う
of
議論です。
ODA and
まず
how
や
we
はりその大
emphasize
貧国であるとか
ODA.
脆弱層
Number
といっ
one,
た最
support
も
for
ニー
the
ズのあると
most
ころにですね、
in need,
ODA をやは
such
り
as
取
the
り入れるべき
poorest
であるという
or
こと。
vulnerable groups
それか
in
ら
society,
地球規模
social
課題といいま
sectors.
すが、
And number
まあ、気候
two,
変動とか、まあ、
objective
感
number
染
two
症
is
対策
support
と
for
いった、
global
まあ、
public
そこ国
goods
際的
like climate
の、
change,
まあ、課
infectious
題に対し
diseases.
て、
These are
取り組みを
international
入れるべきだろうと。
issues,
そして
and
3番目
ODA
に、
should be
まあ、もっと、
allocated
まあ、
for
ODA といえど
addressing
も
this
自国
issue.
利益というも
Number
のを
three
追
is
求しなくて
pursuit
はい
of
けないとい
national
う、
interests.
声が大きくなってきていると。
So we are
で、
hearing
特にこの3番
voices,
目の自国利
increasing
益の追
voices
求と
on
いうも
number
のを見据
three,
えてです
pursuit of
ね、
national interests.
相
So
互利
based on
益、
this
ミューチャ
thought,
ルインタレストという言い方
a
が、
new aid
ヨーロッパ
narrative
でもここ、
emphasizing mutual
こ
interest
の頃、まあ、頻繁
is
に使われているという
rising
状況です。
and most heard recently.
で、この ODA の自国利益と
So
いうところでですね、
ODA
その学術的な成果の
pursuing
整理をし
national
ようというところ
interest.
にありまして、
Also, there's an
例えばド
attempt
イ
to
ツの、
synthesize academic
キールイン
evidence.
スティテュートと
For
いう研究機
example,
関がです
Kiel
ね、
Institute,
関連の
research
プロジェク
institute
トを
in
立ち上げたりしてお
Germany,
ります。
have
まあ、
launched
この中ではで
a
すね、
research project on
スライド
mutual
の下に
interest
あり
in
ますけれど
ODA.
も、
And as you can find
まあ、
underneath,
その
one of the
利益、リターン
achievements
という、自
were
国リターンというものを、経済的利益、地政学的利
to
益、あるいは
classify
安全保
donors'
障上の利益
benefit
という
from
ふうにこう分けて
ODA
ですね、
and review the
様々な
academic
研究成果
evidence,
を整理しておりますけれど
splitting
も、
into
ま
economic
あ、必
returns,
ずしもエビデンスが蓄積
geopolitical
されていな
returns,
い
and
分野もあ
security
る
and
と。まあ、
stability.
例えば、
However, the
資源
evidence
が
remains
発
limited in
見され
some
たことに対し
areas.
てです
For
ね、
example,
欧米
when
で
there's
まあ不安定
resources
ということが
founded,
あります。
found,
じゃあその
there
結果、
is
そ
a
の
big
ODA が、
concentration of
まあ、その
ODAs,
協力国にどういうリターンをもたらしたかみたいなところでは、例えばまだまだ
but
研
how
究がさ
much
れていると。
return have
まあ、そういっ
that
た指摘を
resource
まあ
or
しており
ODA
ます。
have provided to the donor
それから、
country? It may
もう
not
一つ、具
be
体的な
clearly
傾向としてはで
established
すね、
in the
ヨーロッ
academic
パ、それから中
circle.
国までもがですね、日本型
Europe
の
and
その
China
ODA に接近しつつあるのでは
are
ないかと
moving
いうふう
toward
に
the
見ておりま
Japanese
す。
style ODA.
これは具体的にはですね、
More specifically,
その日本の、ODA とまあ、経済的利益
Japanese
の関
style
係ですね。
ODA
こちらにつ
has
い
a
て、
tie between
まあ、例えば
economic link
1980年代ぐらい
and
までは
ODA.
ですね、非
And
常にこの
until
ヨーロッパは日本に対して、
Europe have been quite critical in Japan's approach to ODA, but now it's being revisited and finding the Japanese approach more successful. I also hear from my stakeholders in Europe how Japan divides the national interests and the terms of ODA. And approaches similar to Japan's aid philosophy are emerging. I mentioned about European countries slashing aid. But now we hear UK is proposing 4 shifts, 4 essential shifts, more specifically changing from donor to investors. This has been said for a few years now. And number 2 is from service delivery to system support, and then more local solutions and granting expertise to local solutions. These are the values Japan placed importance in ODA, and now all these are reinvented by UK. China has also begun to emphasize development cooperation narratives similar to those of Japan in their Belt and Road Initiative. So Europe and China are now taking the lead on ideas Japan long sought to promote. In this situation, how should Japan approach ODA and where should we direct our aim toward? As I mentioned, Japan and Europe are now sharing quite similar perspective on ODA, but it used to be different. More specifically, Europe, from a spirit of giving, that is how all ODA started, and the spirit of atonement. But now we see a new shift, a social security net or international solidarity. In terms of blended finance, there's a focus on blended finance utilizing private funding. It's almost like a financial product, a financial or accommodation. And we see upholding of the national interest in ODA. But there are some critical views from the citizens' social associations, the ODA becoming more transactional, or almost like a conditional or approach or conditional negotiation on ODAs. On the other hand, Japan had a very different approach based on self-help, self-sufficiency, and co-prosperity. So the view on ODA was quite different from that of Europe. They did not always feel fully aligned with the DAC's normative framework. So it was quite uncomfortable. But since the 1990s, the late 1990s, the Japanese economy started to struggle and fall. Also, a greater emphasis on national interest amid economic stagnation became very apparent. So on the field, there are efforts on the ground to balance a three-way equation or win-win-win situation among developing country, the national or donor country, and the global interest. So there are creativity devised on the ground. But the concern is the recipient countries are changing because they are diversifying funding resources, and they are able to compare the conditions among different donors. So the developing countries are becoming or veering toward a transactional approach. It would be great if it's a joint approach to long-term challenges. But sometimes the project has a clear deadline and needs to be completed at a certain period. So my question would be, how can we build a long-term and mutually trusting relationship with developing countries beyond short-term interests? How we can build a trust and sound relationship between the donor countries and developing countries. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Harada.
そうですね。欧州の動きを中心に、ご紹介いただきましたけれども、欧州のその食材やギビングの精
Thank you
神に基
very
づ
much for
く
introducing the situation in Europe. You talked about the spirit of atonement and the giving. And compared to 1945, post-World War II. And Japanese ODA celebrated its 70th anniversary 2 years ago. So it's been 90 years, 70 years, and our approach is changing. And we shouldn't be following the same approach of that 70, 90 years ago. So based on this discussion, we'd like to talk about the mutual benefit as a key word and consider the Japanese style ODA. Now, we'd like to introduce the panelists. First of all, Mr. or Dr. Yoshiyuki Sagara. He is a senior research fellow at the Asia Pacific Initiative. He has expertise in international political economy, foreign and security policy, and international conflicts. He's also worked and served at the United Nations in New York headquarters. Now I would like to also introduce Professor Todo Yasuyuki, PhD in economics. He is also the Council, Industrial Council of Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry. He studies the demonstrative studies on the economic growth and residence and the impact of them. Next, I would like to introduce Dr. Ono Yoko from Save the Children Japan. Ms. Yoko have worked in private companies and a nonprofit organization, and also in development cooperation institutes. She has also been engaged in advocacy and been in Save Children from 2014, engaged in ODA, climate change, and humanitarian crisis. Now, next is Ms. Kana Iwasawa, the Assistant Manager, External Relations Department at Daikin Industry. Daikin Industry was established in 1924, or it has a history of more than 100 years. It started as a small factory in town, but now they are the number one biggest HVAC manufacturer. And their slogan is to provide an answer through air. They have extended footprint abroad in 170 countries, and the overseas sales account for 84% of their total sales, and more than 80% of their employees work outside of Japan. Now, Ms. Iwasawa have worked at the Global Strategy Division and now serves as the External Relations Department Assistant Manager. Now, we would like to call you by your name and invite the panelists to discuss on theme number one, Japan's ODA and its contribution to mutual benefit. What values does Japan's ODA prioritize or should prioritize? So we would like to turn to Dr. Sagara, Professor Sagara.
The floor, yes. Thank you very much. I am from the Institute of Geoeconomics, a Senior Research Fellow, Sagara. Thank you very much for this opportunity today. As Harada-san touched upon the meaningful of Harada, you touched upon that just now. it's been 80 years since the end of war, and I think we are currently in a big transition time. Another thing is that the meaning of these aids is that post 80 years since the war, this has always been thought, is what I want to say at the outset. As to why we have to continue these assistance or aid is that for the taxpayers of each of the countries, we have to, or we have been explaining that to the people. But despite that, the fact that these ODA has developed was thanks largely US, which really had accelerated its leadership up to now, I think is the present. I think it was last week, the Japanese Ministry of Foreign Affairs touched upon foreign policy as well as international situations. It came up with the foreign policy white paper, and it was written, I cite, free and open international order is currently eroded. The national security surrounding Japan is more complex and is becoming more tense. The post-Cold War period, this relative stable period has already ended. This was written in the Foreign Diplomacy White Paper. As I said at the outset, this has a big transition time. In a nutshell, I believe that these values and rules of laws, a liberal international order, LIB, liberal international order, I'm not sure whether it has ended, but I think we are in a big transition period. In other words, power-based transactional international order is where we are steering. Once again, 80 years since the war, when I reflect this, the United States from the outset to the emerging nations has not been supporting these developing nations, but what the US played an important role is the Marshall Plan, and through that it first off resurrected the Western society. However, this Marshall Plan is mainly for the Western nations, in other words, the European nations, but for the East Europe, this was under the Soviet rules. So I think this also resulted to the East-West Cold War, I think was one of the characteristics of this Marshall Plan. The support to foreign countries was already embedded in this power politics, I think is one of the history. This changed in around the 1960s. And ironically, this was the time where there was a Vietnam War, and at that time, the military aid of Vietnam became too much, and against rebellions to that, we started to shift to basic human needs for international treaties such as water, education, health. These were the movements that was the areas we needed to support. UDAED, this also came in effect in the 1960s, so those are the history. Post 1960s in the United States, we started to see some curb in their power in financial economy. Their power started to slow down, and there we started to see Japan rise. However, in terms of Japan, trade balance was very large, so there was a US-Japan trade friction, which we are currently seeing between US and China present. Japan had very large trade surpluses, and we are able to return this to the international society, or how we are able to contribute to the international society was a issue for Japan. As such, Japan started to be very proactive in ODA. That was the international environment as well as the domestic situation, and something that I do wanted to underscore. However, that continued to the 1990s, but the Japanese economic power relatively started to go down, and the Japanese ODA status, as you currently understand, more than anything, in the post-Cold War written in the foreign diplomacy white papers from the early 1990s to 2015. I think the 25 years was one of the golden age. Climate changes or the rights for the minorities such as LGBT in a diverse ways. There was the momentum to promote international cooperation, and I think that was the SDGs in 2015 as well as adoption of the Paris Treaty. At the time, I was working at the UN Secretariat, and in the UN National Assembly, I saw this being resolutely adopted in the United Nations. And in 2016, there was the Brexit, we started to see Trump administration coming to power. And then the situation regarding these ODAs or aid started to go to a downtrend. As you see, we are now in a time where power is the key. When I talk about power, it's not just this hard power, but also soft powers. And for the ODA, I believe it's important for that purpose. In the international political professor, Joseph Nye, had said that smart power combining this hard and soft power is very important. And I believe that Japan, through these ODAs, has embedded trust and how in the recent words within the national power, how we are able to position that. I think that perspective is important. Thank you very much, Sagara-san. Post the regime from the post-international situation to look on the Japan as well as the Western and the American ODA. I think you said that as the strength of power is becoming stronger, you also pointed out the importance of soft power. Next, we would like to have Professor Todo to touch upon.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the kind introduction. I am Todo from Waseda University. By the way, as JICA may have already shared, I have my link to my slides. So if you're interested, please scan the link to access the slide deck. Without further ado, as kindly introduced, I am a professor researching data on international and development economies. So I would like to talk based on evidence today. So topic number one, does Japan's ODA contribute to mutual benefits? Number two, what value should Japan's ODA emphasize or place importance on? So based on evidence, I do believe Japan's ODA contributes to mutual benefits to Japan and recipient countries. First, about the benefits to recipient countries, there are many, several thoughts, and I would like to share some case studies later. But how we evaluate benefits? There are ex-post external evaluations, and other than that, there are quantitative impact evaluation run by researchers like us. And there's quite a lot of data, and there are positive effects in many cases found. Like in JICA annual evaluation report, there's evaluation A for 37%, 54% evaluation B, and 8.5 evaluation C, or rating C. And of course, there are discussions around benefits to Japan or donor countries. But of course, it's the recipient countries developing and have a positive impact to Japanese countries as the market expands for Japanese firms. And according to my personal research, Japanese ODA also promotes the ODA on FDI, foreign direct investment. So there's a vanguard effect of ODA. This is especially true for Japan-style ODA. And in Western ODAs, they do not see a vanguard effect on FDI. So the Japanese style ODA expands the supply chain. There is also support for overseas expansion of SMEs, small and mid-sized enterprises. And moreover, it helped build trust with Global South. And there is a growing importance on the resilient supply chains and strengthening economic security. I would like to share a few examples. Number one, this is part of my research achievements. This is roughly 15 years ago. This is technical cooperation for casting industry in Indonesia. This is to support technological progress of local industries. As you can see in the photos below, these are small size enterprises, but they are a supplier of Japanese enterprises. So through the ODA, we were able to help enhance the productivity and enlarge the supply chain. The other project was in Ethiopia, the forest management, farmer school, and forest coffee certification. So there were forest conservation and helped increase the farmers' income. And on the right bottom photo, as you can see, the Japanese companies have paid attention to this forest coffee and imported this coffee from Ethiopia. So it helped creating consumer markets. And then also support to small and mid-sized enterprises. I do not have a data-supported evidence, but I would like to introduce one case. This is a small to mid-sized enterprise producing an underground tank for gasoline stations or gas stations. And they have done a demonstrative experiment, a project, and they visited Vietnam and introduced the effectiveness of this project. They found tangible results, and as a company, they made a direct investment for local production in Vietnam. This also was beneficial to Japanese companies extending footprint abroad. So that's a benefit for the donor, Japan. But for Vietnam, they are able to roll out safer double-layer underground tanks. So it helps improving the environment in Vietnam. And they also introduced a STEP, special terms for economic partnership. This was the first Jakarta Metropolitan Subway system. They used a cutting-edge technology called shield tunnel methods. And in the Philippine railway project, there was a US, Japan, Philippines cooperation on infrastructure development. So in one term, we heard that the ODA from US is declining sharply, but there are areas where the collaboration and joint partnership between US, Philippines, and Japan are strengthened. And also about the loan assistance, we see increased direct investment from Japanese companies. So ODA is helping and contributing to mutual benefits for sure, especially helping the bilateral or economic development. And one of the importance of ODA, Japanese-style ODA, is the technical support, utilizing the technical advantage in Japan and help develop the advancement of technology. And also it helps Japanese companies going abroad and doing business abroad. And this also, during the process, it helps build trust, relationship, and ultimately help the security, national security. Thank you very much. That's all from me. Thank you very much, Dr. Todo or Professor Todo. You mentioned about the counterpart country, the mutual benefits from the economic development perspective and the economic security perspective. Thank you very much for sharing both benefits for the donor and the recipient. Now we would like to hear more specific case studies from Iwasawa-san of Daikin. Over to you.
Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm Iwasawa from Daikin Industries. I myself is working in External Relations Department, and we are supporting the COPs, and we are involved in public engagements in international society and try to connect our company as well as the society. For example, energy conservation penetration in the emerging nations is one of the work that I am currently working on. Today, from the industry perspective, I want to touch upon the value Japan's ODA should focus. Recently, I think the year before last, I myself, through JICA's private PPP, I've been involved in penetrating air conditioner in Nigeria, and I want to touch upon the role of Japan in that. As touched upon earlier, the theme of the seminar, which is mutual benefit, I think in Europe, this is being emphasized once again in Europe in the recent years, but I feel that by no means it's a new concept for the Japanese ODA. The Japanese ODA centered around JICA as evidenced initiatives led by JICA, Japan's ODA, starting by addressing developing nations' challenges in infrastructure, institutions, and human resources, by supporting the development of national foundations, contributing to the sustainable development of developing countries. As a result, created an environment conducive to business benefiting Japanese industry and national interest, thus achieving a balance between business and public interest. As I said, in terms of the examples of Nigeria, from the perspective of balancing business and public interest, it really showcased this mutual benefit, so I would like to share that today. I will share the screen. Thank you. In terms of this project, in terms of the Nigeria low GWT refrigerant R32, the business I want to explain about this project. On backdrop of this project was that Nigeria faces a persistent power shortage, and the challenge that we combine this. First, in the case of Nigeria, as a social issue, had the challenge of energy consumption, GHG emission due to hot environment and growing demand for air conditioning. We expect that the population is going to increase by 2050, and through economic development, the need for air conditioning has really risen. Furthermore, due to climate changes, the requirement for air conditioning has heightened. As a result of that, the forecast for air conditioning in the market stock by 2050 was expected to be 8 times, as well as power consumption and GHG emission was expected to be 7 times by 2050. As we have these social issues, of course, Nigeria has a very bad energy perspective, so there's a lot of blackout too. Therefore, where there is lacking, would be more power usage as a result of these air conditioning. We are already doing businesses in Nigeria, and one of the challenges that we have is that energy conservation regulations are not appropriately implemented. As such, inverter that has energy conservation is not appropriately recognized. It's very difficult to differentiate us from competitors in Nigeria. As there's energy conservation is not put in, the consumers were not able to really understand the meaning of reducing energy. Therefore, 80% of the air conditioning was non-inverter aircon, which was cheap, but didn't have the energy conservation systems. But we decided to focus on penetrating the inverter. In the case of inverter, air conditioning with inverter and non-inverter air conditioning, the energy consumption is different by 50%. So it's already a technology that has been established. So by shifting from non-inverter to inverter, you're able to reduce energy consumption by half. And in 2 years, you're able to gain back the investments. As such, we conducted tests on comparing these air conditioning. Under the actual environment, we conducted a test on the energy consumption of inverter and non-inverter air conditioner and came up with what kind of reduction it can bring, and we made proposals to the Nigeria government. What we were able to achieve is that during this project, in February 2025, the energy conservation system came in place. And in Africa, even though there is a system, it's very difficult to have this kind of operation. Therefore, in the Nigerian government, we rate below here, but we did underscore this to the Nigerian government, such as CO2 emission amount, as well as the energy consumption. And as such, we had the government to understand. Furthermore, based on these policies, as through PPP, we were able to also participate in government advisory committee and be able to participate in making proposals. These initiatives as a company, we were able to continue this even after the end of this demonstration, and we were able to expand sales of the inverter air conditioning. Regarding this initiative, what is important is that this initiative was not aimed to promote a particular product, but the planning as well as the implementation of energy conservation policy is what it was done. Through this project for Nigeria, it was able to improve energy supply demand, and as well as taking measures against climate change, as well as reducing burdens for the consumers that provided public benefit. And for Japan, the high energy conservation air conditioner was rightly evaluated and the market was formed. As the example cases, the value that Japan's ODA has focused has provided self-support and at the same time have been able to create an environment where Japanese businesses are able to conceive business. And I believe that this is one of the important key and values that the Japanese ODA should proceed. That is all from me. Thank you very much, Yosawa-san. You were very concrete and showcased examples. What was very impressionist is not starting from the product, but you really focused on the policy of the emerging nations and fortified the energy conservation as well as countermeasures against climate changes. Against the mitigation of climate changes, I think this is also a benefit to the international benefit. So based on this international benefit, I would now like to have Ono-san to speak.
Thank you for the kind introduction. I am the head of Global Advocacy Policy. I am Yoko Ono of Save the Children Japan. Thank you very much for inviting me as a representative of civil society. But today, what I introduce is not representing my organization or represent any civil society's view. This will all be my personal view. So thank you very much for your kind understanding. Now, let me share my presentation. Hope you can see it. Well, thank you. I'm very glad to hear that. So how does the ODA, or how has the ODA contributed to mutual benefit? And Professor Sagara kindly shared from a comprehensive view, and I very much appreciate it. From myself, I would like to talk about the national interest and international benefits. And most of the time, there was importance on either of them. And post-war, there were more emphasis on the economic national interest. But I believe it helped the East Asian miracle. But there was a swing. And the eradication of poverty, it became the center of interest. So I believe that in terms of international interest, a lot of countries and nations joined forces to eradicate the poverty. And in the 1990s in Japan, was the dawn of the civil society. So it was a very happy era where a lot of NGO participated in aiding and assisting developing countries. And we also at the same time saw all rising international issues or global issues like infectious diseases or climate issues.
今、協力しております。マルチセクターで、はい、協力させていただいております。
So this is a multi-sectoral collaboration or cooperation. So the contribution to mutual benefits, a role traditionally played by civil society. So the civil society have contributed to the most in need and benefits for the people in developing countries, and also contributed in the fields of peace, environment, and global health. So I think this is common for JICA since the year 2000s. It helped contributing to build trust in Japan and enhancing its international standing. So the policy, how can we collaborate in development assistance? And it has been open to the civil society promoting the development. So it's not just myself, but there were a lot of critical views on the Japanese style ODA, and those views were also collected and looked into for all the further development. So it's a democratic approach, and I believe the civil society contributed to the order. From a civil society's perspective, I believe the value ODA should play is very idealistic and it may be pure. Of course, there's an emphasis on humanitarian perspective. And currently, there's an unprecedented humanitarian crisis. The voices we hear on a daily basis is jeopardizing people's life and human rights. And we cannot emphasize too much the critical situation. And the CO2 emission on a global scale, all of these cannot be confined to one country. It's a mutual or help and collaboration necessary in order to address these issues. And ODA is a public fund, so it's tax money, so we shouldn't waste any yen, and we want to make sure whether these values and money are reaching those most in need. And the value is the center of the power, and that's really true. So therefore, ODA should place more importance on universal values. That's how I believe. The civil society looked into the granularity of citizens and regional unit, not the government or national unit. I believe Ms. Sadako Ogata also promoted on the human securities. And I believe it's important to re-evaluate and re-value the human security perspective. Not sure how I can return back to the previous page. So ODA, once again, there are voices or mounting voices that Japan is struggling themselves, so shouldn't be paying or spending a lot of ODA. I would like to share a public opinion survey on the awareness of ODA. Save the Children have done an international survey with approximately 20,000 respondents. And this is not surveying the Save the Children supporters. It's commissioned to an online survey companies, and it was conducted in March 2025 on the attitude toward international collaboration, cooperation. The reason why international cooperation is necessary is for the peace and stability of the international community, and the principle of international cooperation is to ensure no adverse impact to fundamental human rights or democracy, and areas where Japan's international cooperation focus is the social services such as education and health care. So all these are all rated very high. We shouldn't neglect or forget about this. There are supportive views on ODA, and it's important we foster the supportive views, and we could promote and advertise the views of the civil society in order to foster the amicable views. Thank you very much, Ms. Ono. I joined JICA in 1990. It was one of the happiest moments and era. I was very fortunate to join so international collaboration, and there was a value from a humanitarian perspective and a moral responsibility. And until now, we've heard how we can perceive mutual benefits. I would like to reconfirm the preemptive. In 1980s and 1990s, after those time, we are in a transitional period after the year 2000, and there were different regimes, but currently the ODA and diplomacy is steering toward more transactional values. It's more used and evaluated more transactionally. But the value of development, as the panelists kindly shared, is to build a trust. It's part of a soft power to build trust and to consider win-win-win situation, something we pursue in the mid to long term. So the counterparty, ourselves, and the international society all have benefits and merits, and that also all contribute to solving international and global issues. The key word is fostering trust. That's how I understood the presentations. Thank you very much. Now we'd like to move on to the next discussion.
As I said, in terms of the changes in the international environment, as well as from the perspective of mutual benefit, I want to see how Japan's ODA, what it should change, what should be maintained, which direction we should steer, and concrete actions. First off, we would like to have Toro-san to present, please. Thank you very much. In terms of the second discussion point, in changing the international domestic environments, what role should Japan's ODA play and what actions are required? First, in terms of the changes in the international environment, the geopolitical factors or the protectionism policies, with that, there is a risk of supply chain constraints, which is a big threat to the economic security. And the changes in the domestic environment is that for a prolonged period of time, Japan was stagnated and recently we're starting to see fierce inflation. Therefore, the rejection to ODA is increasing. As you see on the green diagram on the left-hand side, it says on the right-hand side, it says the percentage of people who believe that ODA should be reduced. In the recent years, it was slightly going up, but now recently it's going down again, as you see on this chart. From the economic securities perspective, the China's support is increasing, such as the Belt and Road and the Global South have been utilizing that and have been developing their economy. On the graph on the left-hand side is the FDI from China to the BRI countries, and on the right-hand side is the export to China from the BRI countries. In the past, I myself as a result of these experiments. Within this, China is becoming a hub for international politics as well as international economy. On the left-hand side is the China import of past elected countries, and in Asia, as you can see, it's increasing. On the right-hand side diagram is the recent survey to opinion makers in ASEAN's. What country is most influential in Southeast Asia for political and strategic influence and economic power? China is 40%, US 29%. When it becomes economic power, China 55.9%, US 15%. So there is high dependency on China. Unfortunately, amidst that, Japan's presence among the global south is reducing, is going down. This is a result of my research, but if you look at the bottom left chart, this is the number of Japanese infrastructure projects in the BRI countries. As you can see, the numbers are going down. And on the right-hand side, these are dignitaries from these countries to Japan. In other words, political as well as economic connections are shrinking. On the other hand, the ODA to the BRI countries, this has not necessarily gone down. Though where the China's ODA has increased, we are also seeing tendency from ODA in Japan to increase. In other words, Japan's ODA is strategic. As such, within this, Japan's role of ODA is increasing. Another important thing is that these intellectual collaboration with the Global South is becoming important. On the chart on the left-hand side is the research of COVID, where the international research collaboration was conducted. As you see here, the Asia's Global South nations such as India, Pakistan, as well as Indonesia are already embedded in these global intellectual network. And on the right-hand graph, Global South nations such as India as well as Thailand, these international networks collaboration has also increased. However, unfortunately, Japan has not really been embedded here as required. However, these joint research with Global South is a benefit to Japan, especially you're able to come and develop products that meet the needs and requirements of the people in those countries. As such, we need to increase these going forward. From that perspective, the ODA is contributing, for example, the support to Indian university, and we are increasing joint research with Japan, as well as supporting the university network between Japan and ASEAN. These are the support that we need to further increase. To summarize, within these changes, the role of Japan's ODA is the mutual security, to strengthen the economic security of both countries. We want to ramp up the supply chain. That's number one. Number two is to expand the intellectual collaboration with the Global South. To be more specific, what is important is to the people in Japan, the Japanese ODA is also supporting the national security as well as the economic growth. I think this needs to be recognized, as well as for the donor nations. This also needs to be fostered. In other words, for the Japanese ODA projects has not necessarily conveyed to the people. In other words, people on the ground don't really understand that it's a project from Japan's ODA. This will not foster the trust to Japan. As such appeal is also very important. And lastly, I did not say in my presentation, but going forward to expand the market and further from the economic security perspective, the support to Africa is required to expand. That is all from me. Thank you very much, Professor Todo. The relative economic situation in Japan, based on that, we really need to ramp up the intellectual networks such as innovation and collaborate with Global South. And for that, we have to get the understanding from here at home and abroad is, I think, what you mentioned.
Next from Ms. Iwasawa, we heard a little bit about innovation. So would you kindly elaborate on the innovation part, please? Thank you very much. Yes. We heard about the role of the Japanese-style ODA he played. It talks about the support to the system and design and the business legal benefits. And while I explained about the project, there was a deeply rooted activities to the local students and the education. So we found the impact from the local feedback. And I appreciate the continuous ODA support from Japan. But if I talk about the future action, necessary actions, we also often been asked about the national interest in mutual benefit. So as a company, we talk about the order track record, the sales in the short-term benefits. Maybe we should change our mindset when we perceive the national interest. If we put short-term benefits as a tool to assess and evaluate the ODAs, it will be hard to assess the long-term benefits like developing the market foundation, helping fostering human talent, and so forth. So I found there's a gap between the directions of the national government. So in this here, we want to build the market foundation for a sustainable business. And I believe it's important to consider and look ahead in the long term when supporting. And it's also important to see a clarified scenario for the economic discovery and development. And it's important to share this narrative with the society so that it can gain trust and understanding. I believe the public and business mutual benefits is also pursued. And the long-term development is where Japanese cutting-edge technology would benefit the local or recipients. And what's important is the partner and private partnership, I believe, in this perspective. When we do PPP, I would like to share what I felt through the project in Nigeria. First is placing importance of establishing rules and systems. So it's not short-term sales or providing services to the recipients. It's building the foundation, the platform. This is where a Japanese company can contribute to the local or community, and also building an environment where the technical value is rightly evaluated. And also, I believe the role of ODA as an international institution is very important. Even though, as a company, it's well perceived, it's harder to pursue. JICA and public institutions can help us to share the justification with the recipient country government on how it's important and how it benefits the community and the public. And also, it's important to build a long-term trust. The system is not built for all its purpose. The operation and providing benefit through the operation is important for the recipient countries. So, all through private and public partnership, I believe we can provide a mutual support on fostering and developing human talents alongside the technical transfer. So it's a multi-layer support. So like JICA have been continued providing efforts. It's important we support the foundation and the platform for the developing countries to be self-sufficient and solve future issues. In the long term, it's important to balance and pursue both the public mutual benefit and the private resilience. Thank you very much. Thank you, Ms. Iwasawa, for sharing. So, rather than a short-term sales, but building the rules and systems, building trust in the mid to long term. So, or rather than pursuing the short-term national interest, placing more importance on the development of the recipient or developing countries and build trust among each other is important. Thank you very much. And now I'd like to turn to Ms. Ono.
はい。今ちょっと共有させていただきます。
Allow me to share my screen.
はい、見えてますでしょうか。
Can you see my screen?
今回に相互利益の観点で日本の
From the perspective of mutual benefit, the theme for today was thinking of the Japanese ODA. I've been speaking in many places, and I believe that it's really difficult. I was on the train, I was sleeping, I was thinking, what is the role of ODA? Obviously, it's very difficult because it's just difficult to think. But when you think about the Japanese ODA, not from a naive idealism, what is the ideal image of Japan from the perspective of ODA? I believe that this needs to be sought. I speak with the diet members from my work, but the representative of the people from LDP to the opposition party, I speak to many people. But in this image of these nations, there's various ways of thinking or views, is what I feel. Within that, from the perspective of civil society, Japan's nation, as you see, we are starting to see low birth rate, and as touched upon earlier, various emerging nations have come up and the international situation is changing. Japan's position is neutral and with integrity. And a keyword, I believe, is not a superpower, but as a middle power. As a peaceful nation, we cannot be involved in direct military action or attack. And also the basic human rights, as well as democracy, as well as rule of laws, these are being eroded. Therefore, we need to protect that. And further, we have to establish international network. As a middle power, from the Japan's perspective, this will lead to Japanese society, Japanese security, as well as national interest. From that perspective, when we think about the ODA that contributes to the Japanese national, when we think about this mutual benefit, it overlaps the national interest as well as the international interest. As a middle power, that the country that is trusted as Japan, we need to expand this in concrete way is the necessary action. Every day, as you see on the news, we see excessive small national interest or narrow national interest. Seeking a narrow national interest will erode the national interest. I'm not going to talk about a particular country, but when you talk about a particular country, they have a lot of resources and strong dollars. And even if they think about first, there's a lot of things that they can do. However, in the case of Japan, Japan cannot do. If Japan goes to extreme nationalism, I believe that this will erode the national interest. Secondly, from that perspective, we have to provide a humanitarian society as well as revitalizations because we can't use arms. So we have to be able to do this from Japan's reputation maintenance and also to ramp up soft power, ODA, as well as democracy, as well as human rights and rules of laws to convey these universal values, we have to utilize the ODA. And in terms of ODA, the amount of ODA is shrinking. And each of the donors, as well as international institutions, I haven't written here, but various foundations, as well as the emerging countries' movement of funds, in order to equate this, I think collaboration is required. In terms of middle powers, it's education, insurance, and social matters. When you touch upon these things on international conferences, for middle powers, it's easy for them to underscore that as a discussion point. And from that perspective, by combining various funds, you're able to expand your scale. And lastly, it's a civil society. From our perspective, we don't think of things in a country perspective, but think of things from a perspective of emerging nations or Japanese perspective. A assistance that is visible is definitely required, but that doesn't mean that we just require Japanese flags. For the emerging countries or the developing countries, these people are workers, producers, as well as consumers of the products made by Japan, and even maybe workers of these companies. So in order to have Japan to be a country that is trusted, we have to be able to maintain an open relationship with these people from these developing nations. That is all from me. Thank you very much, Ms. Ono. Japan, you touched upon, is a middle power, and I think there's probably pros and cons to that. And as Todo-san mentioned earlier, in Africa, the average age is about 20, and Europe about 40, in Japan about 50. Countries where the age has increased, how from the mid to long perspective, you're able to gain trust and be able to contribute to people's solidarity. I think you pointed out, as such, the relationship and connecting people and people are important, which is something that JICA has been doing. Lastly,
I'd like to turn to Dr. Sagara or Professor Sagara on what action should we take. Thank you very much. I've heard all the discussions and I felt so developing countries, emerging countries are developing economically, but there's a lot of challenges they are facing. As Ms. Kamei mentioned, there are new challenges like a shrinking population and a small birth rate. And I think there are more support we can provide. There are countries under conflict and suffering from the impact of conflicts. So sharing Japanese technology would help solving the issues at the recipient countries and help achieve the stability and prosperity of on the global scale. I believe there are bigger roles that Japan can play, as well as JICA can play. So in that perspective, I am very happy to hear insightful comments and opinions. So ODA contributes to the mutual benefit, and we see increasing number of evidence helping and supporting that. We also hear from the donors and Daikin from Daikin about air conditioners. They have a leading technology in the world and kindly share the case study. I also discussed in with a researcher from South Asia. And we heard due to the Strait of Hormuz being closed, the gasoline or gas gas prices has gone up 30%. So energy saving technology is increasingly important. And Japan have accumulated technology after the oil shock back several decades ago. So there are more technology that can contribute to the power consumption, and it also contributes to building rules and systems. So it can contribute to climate change and future energy security policies. As Ms. Ono mentioned, it also connects it to pursuing universal values. So in that sense, Japan has a role to play in the international society. I would like to share four views. Number one, we talk in the context of economic security about the strategic essentials. Excuse me. Japan being an essential part strategically, whether it's the resources or the particular products or goods. But also Japan could be an essential part of the international society, providing technology. So in that sense, Japan can be a strategically essential part of the international society from a technical provision. And number two is, as discussed in the air conditioning example, the taxation. So the high-end technology Japan have fostered and developed could be readopted in climate change context. So craft it, adopt it, and process it to meet the needs of the global services. And number three is the importance of the narrative. The contribution of Japan should be shared in a story, in a narrative. It should be vocalized. Like 15, 16 years ago, there is a continuation of Project Story. And it's also part of the ODA support in Chile. I have been engaged in the aquaculture project in the Latin America. And Kame-san also shared a project story. I think it was about Nepali road evaluation. And JICA have worked in tandem, overcoming internal conflicts and addressed a long-standing road issue for 40 years. And that has now all been in a manga comic. So it's almost like a Japanese history connecting to the world history. And these narratives being shared through a manga comic book is also a very important asset. So it's also important to accumulate this narrative. And number four, the diplomatic security policies. There is a discussion on collaboration, and I am considering about insurance, and there are a role all Japan can play in the global health arena, like Boshitecho, a mother and child handbook, universal health coverage, and insurance financing. So all these technology and articulate could help, and Japan could offer this proactively to show our approach to contribute to the world proactively. Thank you, Professor Sagara. Thank you very much for also introducing the books from our research institute. You also talked about the strategic and essentials. It's not about the resources or product provision, but the presence of Japan, the technology we provide, and the role for ODA to play. I think it was a very meaningful and insightful comment we heard. It's quite hard to summarize everything in one word, but in the later half of the discussion, we discussed the role only ODA can play and placing importance on the role and build a trust relationship into mid to long term. So that's the way we should place importance on. And to do so, we need to communicate clearly to our own national as well as the recipient countries' national. So thank you very much. Now we would like to entertain questions, but before that, we would like to turn to Dr. Harada, Professor Harada, where we heard about Europe. Anything we should share or which we should share to Europe, which are Japan specific or very unique to Japan. Thank you very much. So all talks were very insightful and fruitful thoughts. I do have several comments, if I may. The importance of ODA and approach to ODA to Japan as well as the recipient countries or counterpart countries. Because it might be because I'm in France, but another thing.
日本のこの ODA の考え方っていうものをうまく言語化して
ODA it should also be vocalized and put into narrative to the European audience. The connection with the global south is being recognized in many regions in Europe. I believe it's true for China as well. And when it comes to ODA, there is a Europe-centric concept being the mainstream. But in the current time, discussion shouldn't be confined among the developed countries. We should engage the global south in the discussion. But in Japan, ODA was greatly appreciated on the field, but the value was not broadly shared to the bigger public. So there is a competition to capture the global south. So all the inherited values should be shared and communicated more broadly. And number two, in order to gain support from Japan domestic audience, that's also an important point. Like in UK, they are slashing aid, international aid. And if we hear from the ODA representatives, so the fall from 0.7% of GNI to 0.5% of GNI, they were able to continue their efforts. But if it goes down to 0.3%, they would have to cut a lot of projects, and there are no other choice but to cut the existing projects or ongoing efforts. So of course, we should pursue effectiveness and productivity, but we need to make sure the important part is not cut or slashed. So it's important we communicate and gain support from the audience. And also about KPI, this is also a very important factor. So ODA, why ODA is important is being discussed, and on the worldwide perspective, the aid from US have fallen, and there is a calculation on how many people would die because of US cutting back the amount of aid. We look into the recipients or counterparts' capability and their problems and issues, and look into the long term. So how we set the KPIs? Are we going to replace the counterparts system to help them? We need to look beyond that to allow all the counterpart country to gain self-sufficiency and autonomy by building capability. So I think that would be the way to set the index and KPIs. So those are the areas I hope discussions would mature. Thank you very much, Professor Harada.
How we have to, as we have just discussed, how we think about in terms of how we should convey to the international world, I think you pointed that out. From here, we have another 25 minutes, sorry, we have 15 minutes of Q&A time. In terms of the questions, please use the chat on Q&A. There are questions, and also we received a pre-questions. Unfortunately, we will not be able to respond to all of the questions due to time, but we'd like to pick a couple of these questions. First off, a question to Professor Todo. Why is it that we don't have a trigger effect in the ODA in Europe and in the United States? Thank you very much for your question. In terms of the Western countries and Japan, when you look at the area of ODA provided, for example, in the case of Japan's ODAs, infrastructure or technical assistance or technical assistance to corporations, this is where Japan has focused. On the other hand, the Western nations has focused on health as well as education on social infrastructure. As such, that difference, I think, is showcased. For your information, after our research results, the Korean researcher also conducted similar trigger effect in Korea, and that is because Korea's ODA, similar to that of Japan, supports the economic infrastructure as well as underscores technical cooperation. That's the reason. Thank you very much. Among the questions that we received in advance, it's connected to the Japanese regions, but in terms of co-creation, cooperation, which JICA suggests, I think we can reactivate that through connecting with the Japanese regions. From the civil society's perspective, what value does ODA have? It can be from the perspective of participation, Ono-san. That's a very important question. What the civil society takes great importance is engagement or participation. You can do this online, but not everyone is in Tokyo. For example, there's various NGOs as well as NPOs. For example, in the Noto Peninsula or East Japan, conducted support in disaster support as well as revitalization. They were able to share the experience in the emerging nations and be able to think about how civil society should be, and also the education in the Japanese civil society. We were able to provide such products to the emerging nations, or for example, Noto Peninsula, and be able to provide the background and create the background story. In other words, in those regions, the challenges in each region are very different, even in Japan. And such challenges, such issues, if there are overlaps in emerging countries, you can learn or you can kind of motivate each other. I myself am from a representative of civil society, but even in the corporate activities, I think 80% of the Japanese companies are SMEs. The local companies, local industries for a prolonged period in those areas they've been operating. And to connect the companies in the emerging or developing nations from revitalizing Japan's economy, we shouldn't just focus on Tokyo, but we should be able to connect with various parts of Japan. I believe that JICA has various offices at home. Therefore, I hope that you are able to have these kind of open face-to-face discussions. The more the discussions deepens, you are able to create a forum where the people of the Japanese regional people are able to speak with the developing nations, and we would like to participate that and collaborate that. So these are the areas where the civil society would like to focus. Thank you very much, Ono-san. So from the perspective how to convey, we shouldn't just think about what kind of narrative should we convey, but in what areas where we should be able to convey in order to gain a more broader perspective, I think was the asset today. I think there's various questions. Todo-san, please. In that question, from an economic perspective, I also want to respond. As you said, the SMEs are very important. From that perspective, the JICA has been supporting the overseas expansion for SMEs. What was introduced earlier, the underground tank company in Fukui Prefecture. these regional companies in the regional areas which have technology, but it's very hard for them to expand overseas. I think there are many such SMEs among Japan. Therefore, to support such companies are important. Another perspective is that the overseas corporation, BPO, gains experiences overseas, and these people work in the regional areas. I hear there are quite a number of people. Therefore, the expertise that they gained in these developing countries, they're able to expand that into that region, and I think that's an important channel.
Thank you very much, Professor Todo. So, internationalization of Japanese talents, also connecting expertise. Thank you very much for sharing your perspective. Now we have new questions in the chat box. There's a question about the medical field. May I please ask to Sagara-san? So around 10 years ago, there was a grassroots international collaboration, and this person belongs to an NGO or entity. So it was conveying Japanese medical technology to emerging countries, but now there are donors and association members asking for a return from the recipient countries. So how should we convey the value of the medical from the international or insurance or global health perspective? Well, this is not an easy question to answer. It is a very valuable approach. Our medical resource, medical or technology contributing to the development of our counterpart countries. And it's not just us collaborating, it's China and other donor countries providing assistance and support for development. And we do see changing needs, and that might be true. I also mentioned about adaptation. Because the counterpart is in the center of innovation, and if they are going through a leapfrog to make a drastic or development in economy, we shouldn't be just pursuing our claims. We should think at the process base and the cornerstone. Like in the case of air conditioning, we should change our approach from a conventional approach. I heard from a medical person, when a person visits a hospital in India, they have to carry their X-ray photos. They don't have electronic medical records. They have to carry those X-ray photos themselves. In Japan, we have personal health records. So individual or personal or health status is managed. And we also see the pharmaceutical drug records also electronically taken. So all these are areas Japan could contribute to other countries. And I think many Japanese companies who haven't thought about extending footprint abroad, providing support. And the most knowledgeable ones are the NGOs. So let's use this community power to contribute and explore new ways to contribute to counterpart countries. Thank you very much. Is there any build-on comments from Ms. Ono? Well, it's quite hard to answer this question. I always struggle to think. So this person also struggles to find an answer, and I also find it hard to find an answer. When we talk about return, there are several different approaches, like short-term returns, direct returns, but sometimes it's a ripple effect, a long term. It looks like a very long way in the international society, but there is this butterfly effect. And when we convey medical or technology, what kind of return are they expecting from the recipient countries or developing countries? It really depends on the view, how we respond to that question. So direct return is difficult in the first place. So this is something we need to gain understanding. we can't gather like a consultation fee from the recipients. Maybe we could accumulate some, and in the future, it could be used for or NGO project. It could be like a source of funds. So, or this is like sharing ideas to build returns. And the thoughts of appreciation or the behavior of trust to Japan could be found through questionnaires, perhaps. So we also need to explore or what return the person asking the question is seeking for. And depending on the answer, we have different approaches or different ideas how to respond to the returns. May I please turn to Professor Todo? Excuse me. I always talk about the economy, and I might be very frank, but as mentioned earlier, if we look at Nigeria alone, they have a population of 300 million, 400 million, so it's an enormous market already. So the medical needs is also potentially big and enormous, and that's very clear. So, or capturing the needs of this growing population is very important. It's very valuable, all the information you gain through grassroots medical activities. And it's also a valuable resource for the corporations and companies. And sharing those expertise or values could help companies earn profit. And maybe they would contribute and donate to these activities. So it could help a win-win-win situation. So that would be my comment. Thank you.
Iwasawa-san, as you touched upon a company, so I would also like to touch and give perspective from the business perspective. Where you look at the return, I think, is a very difficult question. And if the company is participating, as I said earlier, the African market is expanding within the area where the business chances, opportunities. Of course, you want to reach that, but they don't have the systems. And from the perspective of a company, due to these various issues, the business will not be established. Therefore, through grassroots activities, establishing the systems and as you are doing various activities to see whether you are able to match the companies, even if that may not directly generate sales immediately from the company's perspective, if there is an opportunity, we would be able to cooperate together with JICA. And it's easier to say that in the company that we have these high targets. And from the mid to long-term perspective, we have an opportunity to be able to make that clear and to be able to articulate that, I think is going to be important. That is all from me. Thank you very much, Hirasawa-san. So this would be the last question. From the question we received in advance, in Liberia, there is somebody from the education agency who is conducting a donor alignment. I'm going to translate that into Japanese because we see the questions in English. In terms of ODA, we touch upon the dynamism from donor as well as the recipient countries. But from the perspective of these mutual benefit for the recipient, we have to underscore the development needs of the low-income country and how you can realize that. From Iwasawa-san, you said early on that the start should be to solve the development issues from the perspective for Iwasawa-san, not just receive and provide, how you can utilize that in developments. When you say ODA, as we touched upon earlier, there's the people who make the support and those who receive support. We shouldn't cut like that, but I think the important is to develop together. From that perspective, As we touched upon today, there are changes in the international situation where we are seeing the ODA budgets being cut. Whilst the mutual benefit is sought, how to receive understanding, to work together as a partner, we should think of what the government issues on the recipient countries are and try to solve that. And at the same time, thinking about the benefit of your own country, you have to kind of align that when you think about that. Todo-san, please. I just want to understand the question. So the question is, by doing excessive ODA, the development of the self-support, self-effort of that nation would stop? Is that your question? Rather than that, the principle of mutual benefit, as you focus on that too much, the low and income country that receive the assistance, will you not be kind of ignoring what their problem is? In other words, there might be too much focus on transactional benefit as opposed to trying to solve the issues that country has. I didn't quite understand the question at the outset, so my misunderstanding. But of course, in the case of ODA, just because it's ODA, the recipient country, we will not be kind of ignoring their request. That's, we will kind of align to maximize mutual benefit. We will try to align that. If you kind of misunderstand what I said, what is important is technical cooperation or infrastructure project. If the technology flows to these developing countries, to come up with this circulation is important, and that will bring the win-win. Thank you very much. Maybe my translation or the way I conveyed, it might have been an issue, but on the other hand, from the response that we received, I think we're able to hear various thoughts. So this concludes the Q&A. I do apologize, we're not able to answer all of the questions, but we would like to conclude.
Last but not least, we would like to hear from each panelist the role of Japan-style ODA, the value of Japan-style ODA, and what should Japan do. We would like to start from the end. Professor Todo, over to you, please. Thank you very much. At the very beginning, about the question from Nishita Teno, or Professor Nishita Teno of Kansei Gakuin University, is about the Belt and Road Initiative, the impact assessment. I just want to emphasize that this was a joint article or joint publication with Nishita Teno professor. I would like to also emphasize the importance on the system development. And this was an area I was unfamiliar with, so it was very impressive to me. So developing rules, systems, and standards was also featured in the World Bank report published last year. And what was emphasized is the international standard is so high. So to reach the international standard, there is a milestone, domestic standards to reach and further elevate the domestic standards to meet the international standards. And if ODA could contribute to that activity, it will be very much outstanding. I believe that a Japanese style ODA could help the gradual development because the Western society tend to have high standards imposed on the recipient countries. So Japan could possibly take a gradual or improvement and contribute to the gradual or improvement. Thank you. Thank you very much for having me today. It was great to hear different views today. And building stories and contributing to the long-term assistance was something I learned today. In the project in Nigeria, I mentioned about JICA's effort in building systems and designing systems so that they can help self-sufficiency of the recipient countries. And in my case, it was the government of Nigeria. They were well appreciating the efforts made by ODA, and the fair and equal partnership was highly evaluated and appreciated. And as a company, being part of the dialogue, it was a very supportive wind, a very strong tailwind. So as an industry, we appreciate the continuation of the ODA and building KPIs to evaluate the economic benefits and the mutual benefits so that we can secure the budget. I hope we can work in partnership as a company and the public institution so that we can gain confidence and trust from the broader public. Thank you. I was thinking what I should say. As Professor Harada mentioned at the very beginning, Europe and China is now approaching the same ODA approach Japan took from before and reinstating it. So what Japan have been doing before, I find a lot of similarities and overlaps with what China does. Like there's a lot of yen loan, yen credit. There is a lot of economic pursuits. And Chinese companies come in and receiving big returns for the narrow or economic benefits was once criticized when Japan done it before. And I hear a lot of similarities in what China does now. So Europe and China is pursuing and coming to the same. So Japan is often said to be a issue solution country or solving countries because we are the trailblazer. So I believe Japan should approach China proactively and European countries how we find risks and how we find problems in the approach. In order to gain more understanding on ODA, the civil society has a role to play to communicate the importance, and we will continue our efforts. But also, all the policy around ODA is determined by policymakers. So as part of democratic move, we will continue to approach policymakers as a civil society. So thank you very much for having me today.
Thank you very much. As the Institute of Geoeconomics, we are very grateful to have received such opportunities with Ogata Research Institute. The topic for today was mutual benefit and what kind of solutions you can provide. I think we also discussed that. But in principle, we, to the emerging countries, developing countries, how we are able to understand the issues that these countries have. So from that perspective, I don't believe JICA can provide all of that, but JICA can act as a catalyst, and this is the issue that this country has. And I think among Japan, JICA has that knowledge the most. And that is why, by connecting this and this, or Japan has these areas, we have this kind of strength. And from the counterpart, they'll be grateful that we are being able to assist even within Japan when you are having difficulties, when you are having troubles. That again, we understand. But we touched upon the oil price. But with this home straight, similar to the COVID, we're starting to see inflation, and there's going to be many countries who are going to face troubles. So to these countries, you have this broad JICA network. I think JICA understands the issues and challenges that these nations have, and I think that's one of the ways we are able to gain trust. Thank you very much. Thank you. We received many insights to think about. So from the Research Institute as well as JICA, in terms of the insights that we received today, we want to be able to utilize that. This concludes the panel discussion, and I would like to return my microphone to the moderator. Thank you very much for very, very insightful discussions today. Lastly, we would like to have Yoshida-san, Senior Vice President, to give the closing remarks.
Under the theme, reconsidering the role of ODA from perspective of mutual benefits, we received at the outset the trend of Europe and the declining ODA trend in USA. We heard about the issues faced at the moment, and we heard the views from the international political and economic development. Thank you very much. As Professor Sagara mentioned at the outset, the international environment is under a transitional period at the moment. The economic development and development assistance that started post-war is now being revisited. So after the post-war, Japan enjoyed a very happy period, enjoying a trade surplus and paying back through economic assistance. But now it's very different. There was a discussion on the number of its. Japan does not have resources and cannot self-sufficiently do everything. And there's a declining population. The size of market is falling, but has a strong technological potential. So Japan cannot survive in a domestic market alone. So economically, Japan should consider expanding abroad and investing abroad. I'm not sure whether we should call it international middle power, but it's important for Japan to jointly collaborate internationally and maintain a significant role in the international society. Today, the panelists talked about the long-term trust-building activities and emphasize on the importance of building trust in the long term. And JICA, as JICA, it's important to think how we collaborate with the global South nations in Europe and in China. The Japan-style ODA is being revisited, re-evaluated, and I think there are clues for the future direction. I believe we are on the right path. So in that sense, returning in the competitive landscape, it's important to solve issues with a conviction and also bringing return back to the donor nations, and articulating or vocalizing is really important. So JICA law has been revised and increasing the option for foreign investment. And we believe we have further fostered collaboration with the private business sector. We want the win-win-win situation on all three directions, helping the developing countries and also contribute to the international society. And Japan's national all should be heard, and we should explain and be held accountable for the activities. I believe the professors talked about the different fields Japan can contribute to solve the counterpart countries' issues, like the Strait of Hormuz is causing energy crisis, and the power-saving technology that Japan have accumulated would be very much helping and contributing to other nations. And because Japan is prone to a lot of natural disasters, have also accumulated disaster prevention technology, have also gone through a recovery post-war, because Japan have a lot of challenges. It's a developed issue facing countries. So we would like to further deepen and develop today's discussion to bring forward the international collaboration. It's not just a short-term return national interest, but a long-term perspective to think how Japan can contribute in a sustainable form. Last but not least, I would like to thank IOG, Institute of Geoeconomic, all the panelists, and all the participants for joining today. I hope today's discussions would contribute to the further development of international collaboration. Thank you.